Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and it is about nearing the end of July, and I realized that I haven't really posted any Jane Austen videos for Jane Austen July. I did post a video a couple weeks ago recommending some classics that were not Jane Austen, but I have not actually posted anything recommending anything Jane Austen related. I have been reading some Jane Austen for a course that I've been taking, but I'm not going to actually be talking about those books here. I'm going to actually recommend some of my favorite Jane Austen podcasts and YouTube channels. Now, if you are not interested in anything related to Jane Austen, that's okay. Feel free to click off, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. First up, we have Pod and Prejudice. I've been listening to this most recently, and this is hosted by Molly and Becca. Molly has never read Jane Austen, whereas Becca has read many a Jane Austen. Season 1 encompasses Molly and Becca reading Pride and Prejudice. Season 2, they read Sense and Sensibility. Season 3, they read Emma, and now they're starting to read Persuasion. Each episode covers a couple of chapters where Molly will recap her understanding of the specific chapters, and Becca guides her through these chapters. They do keep it spoiler free, so Molly has literally no idea what's going to happen, who these characters are, who plays them in adaptations, and they do encourage their readers to not spoil anything for Molly, so don't post anything on their social media that gives spoilers as to, who ends up with whom and things like that. Becca does a really excellent job of guiding Molly through the chapters without giving any spoilers. And at the end of each episode, Becca gives Molly some study questions, things to think about the book, about the era, and things like that. And she does a really, really great job of doing that. It has been an absolute joy to listen to Molly learn to love Austen, and that's a good thing too. Like, what if she what if she hated it? They wouldn't have any further seasons. You can hear it clicking in Molly's brain how these books are more than just romance novels, and how Jane Austen really was intentional in things that she wrote and things that she put in her novels, and how she structured them. One note of caution, they do have explicit language, so if you don't mind a few F-bombs with your Jane Austen, I certainly do not. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I've kept on listening, because they are absolutely hilarious when they go off on tangents, and the F-bombs are, to me, hilarious and a delight. Next, we have Bonnets at Dawn, hosted by Lauren Burke and Hannah Chapman. This podcast started out as an Austen versus Bronte type podcast where they were going to contrast the lives and works of Jane Austen and all three Bronte sisters. Lauren was Team Bronte and Hannah was Team Austen. And a lot of the early episodes do that. They contrast, Heathcliff versus Mr. Darcy, Lucy Snow versus Anne Elliot type things. And then the podcast started to evolve, and they started to cover other literary female writers, such as Lucy Maud Montgomery, George Eliot, Elizabeth Gaskell, Alice Dunbar Nelson, and so many others. And they also did some literary tours. Hannah is from England, so Lauren flew over to England and they toured a bunch of places together, such as Haworth Parsonage, which is where the Bronte sisters grew up. They also went to Bath. They also visited Elizabeth Gaskell's house. So really great literary content for those of you who can't get enough of it. They are also the authors of Why She Wrote, which is a graphic novel covering the lives of all of the female writers that they actually talked about on their podcast. I reviewed this a few videos ago, and I will link that below and up here in the cards. Really enjoyable podcast. Unfortunately, they don't post anymore, and I'm really bummed about that, but there is a great backlist for anybody who wants to binge, and that's exactly what I did. Next, we have What the Austen. This is hosted by Izzy, who brings on a guest each week, and they do a deep dive into the novels and into certain characters of all of the Jane Austen canon. They have some great episodes where they compare villains, like Wickham versus Willoughby, Caroline Bingley versus Isabella Thorpe, or Lady Catherine versus Mrs. Norris. Personally, I think Mrs. Norris is worse. I really dislike Mrs. Norris. And they also do some character studies, such as Jane Bennet and Mary Crawford. And it is Edward Ferrars really a hero? What constitutes a hero? She also does a whole bunch of episodes on sorting Jane Austen characters into Harry Potter houses and comparing them to Disney villains and princesses. Personally, I skip over those episodes. I don't have much interest in Harry Potter or Disney. But if you are really interested in that, I highly recommend this podcast. Now we're moving into the slightly more academic podcasts. The first few that I mentioned are really fun podcasts, regular people reading the books and talking about them, how they understand it, and learning things about them. This next podcast, The Thing About Austen, hosted by Zan and Diane, they take one aspect of Jane Austen's novels. It could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a physical object, and they give it the historical context along with how and why Jane used that particular person, place, or item in her books. They cover certain things such as the thing about Mr. Knightley's strawberries. You know, that scene where they all go to Donwell and Mrs. Elton has that whole rambling thing about strawberries. They actually go into detail about strawberries and why Mrs. Elton named certain strawberries. The thing about Henry Crawford reading Shakespeare. There is an actual deliberate reason why Jane Austen chose Henry VIII for Henry Crawford's reading in Mansfield Park. The thing about Brandon and Willoughby's appointment. Did you realize that Brandon and Willoughby actually had a duel? Well, guess what? I did not realize that until several years ago when I watched the 2007, 8-ish BBC adaptation where they actually do show Brandon and Willoughby fighting a duel. I was like, oh, they're throwing that in. That's a fake thing that they threw in, kind of like the Colin Firth jumping in a lake scene in the 1995 Pride and Prejudice, something that never happened. Well, in fact, it did happen, and you almost miss it. I definitely missed it. I've read Sense and Sensibility many, many times, and I never noticed that they actually fought a duel because the language that is used is so clever. They talk about an appointment. So Zan and Diane go over this appointment and they give the context of dueling and what may or may not have happened with Brandon and Willoughby. The thing about Lucy's filigree. If you remember in Sense and Sensibility, when Lucy and Eleanor have their little tete-a-tete over the little intricate filigree that Lucy is working on for Lady Middleton's children, there's important context there. The thing about Catherine and Isabella's horrid novels, the thing about polluting the shades of Pemberley, really, really interesting stuff. And they will cite certain academic works that they found the research from. They'll bring on guests, academics who study this stuff for a living. And you really understand how intentional Jane was in using certain things in her novels, things that her contemporary readers would definitely have known and understood. Last, we have Dr. Octavia Cox. She is a lecturer at Oxford University, focusing on 18th and 19th century literature, including Jane Austen, George Eliot, the Brontes, Alexander Pope, Keats, Tennyson, and many others. Her YouTube channel has so many fantastic videos doing close readings of Jane Austen texts, such as how does Fanny Price's letter expose Sir Thomas's corruption? Did Mary Bennet fancy Mr. Collins for herself? Why is Emma such an unlikable heroine? And did John Thorpe really propose marriage to Catherine Morland? On this channel, we have an actual academic opining on Jane Austen's texts. I've gained so much context from Dr. Cox's videos. I can't recommend them enough. She is also the instructor of that online course that I've been taking, the one that I just finished on Jane Austen, and I've just signed up for her Victorian Women Writers course, where I'll learn more about George Eliot, Elizabeth Gaskell, Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and Charlotte Bronte. So those are 5 podcasts and or YouTube channels that I listen and watch on a regular basis to gain more knowledge about Jane Austen, her novels, her historical period. Some of these are fun and light, and some of these are academic. And hopefully, out of these 5, you'll find interesting information. So, what are you listening or watching to learn about Jane Austen? Let me know in the comments below. I'm always looking out for new channels and podcasts, not just for Jane Austen, but any great writers that you're interested in. Let me know in the comments below. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great day. Bye.